Liberation Front, on one hand, the National Liberation Front, and on the other side, the government and the Arena Party, a fascist party fundamentally. And so if you want to ask me right away what the fundamental issue is, it is of course the removal of the obstruction of the market, as we call this. That means we are afraid that if the socialists come into power, the market will be obstructed, and that means the surplus value, the value which the workers produce beyond their work and beyond their costs, will not flow freely outside of the country and so on. So therefore we pay for, what is it, $1.4 million a day in order to keep the Arena Party and Cristiani and his government and the oligarchy, the military oligarchy in power.
Now your answer suggests to me that you believe there's some kind of conspiracy here, and that it's not just a problem in El Salvador, but that the problem is found in other parts of the world as well. Am I reading you correctly?
Yes, I mean the CIA and our military and so on are concerned with the obstruction of the market in different countries, in Nicaragua and in Panama recently and so on. And so in order to create stability for the corporations so they can take their surplus value out and their profit, we have to pacify these areas, and we think that the right is better for stabilization of these territories than if the left comes in. Even if the left has a mixed economy, like in Nicaragua, so still we are afraid that there will be a decline of the profit rate.
Bob, we've heard a lot about liberation theology. Is that a factor at all as far as the Roman Catholic Church is concerned? Are the people who are advocating reform and change in El Salvador liberation theology people?
Yes, I think in the best sense, at least if I can speak about the Jesuits who were killed. We have two attitudes. Well, I should say that there are two different forms of liberation theology. One which seems to be some kind of a pathway toward Marxism, or to rely heavily on Marxist presuppositions, and another which is simply very gospel-based and is captured in that notion of preferential love for the poor. And everyone sees, for example, the Jesuits who were killed as very fine and balanced people. The present Archbishop and his auxiliary have a great respect for them. President Cristiani voiced a tremendous respect for them as very moderate, intelligent people. And yet they are pressing the mission of the Jesuits as defined by their last general congregation in terms of the service of faith and the promotion of justice, and certainly no one can criticize them for stressing that kind of liberation, which is really gospel liberation.
How do you look upon the role of the church so far, Rudy, in this situation? Is it a helpful role? Is the church on the right side of things, or is it split and divided?
On the left side of things?
Yeah, okay.
Well, I would say one thing is for sure, the six Jesuits were not communists. They were not socialists. Neither were the sisters of who were killed, three of them whom were my students at Manuel, and nor was Romero or so. But they come from the Sermon on the Mount. They come from the identification with the poor, preferential option for the poor. I mean, the sisters were killed when they were driving to a village where they wanted to teach reading and writing to the poor, you see. But this can already be subversive in a country like this, because they could read, about the surplus value and could find out where their poverty comes from. And then it would become dangerous as such. And then these Jesuits and these sisters are then, or in Nicaragua, two sisters were killed recently by the Contras. So then they are identified suddenly as communists and socialists and have no civil rights anymore and are killed and so on. So this is, I think the church's position is very good. You see that the church sides with the poor.
The government seems to suggest that if there were any soldiers of the El Salvador army involved, that they were renegades, they were mad dogs, as it were. That does not represent any effort on the part of the government to exercise any kind of punitive action. Do you accept that, or do you believe that the government is involved in this, these martyrdoms?
You see, you have ideology involved on both sides. The whole thing is not an insurrection. The whole thing is a revolution already, you see. And so the 8 people who killed the Jesuits were elite troops. That means what Hitler had is SS or our own Green Berets or so. They were, when they're mad dogs, I don't know what kind of elite troops we have. And so Also, the 5 who were raped and killed, at least 3 of the 4 people, church women and so on, nobody said that they were mad dogs. I mean, the death squads are doing this since 10 years, you know. So we think they have a good civil rights record now because they kill only, what is it now, 80 a month or so. Well, they killed, you know, more than this, hundreds of them a month. But in the meantime, they run out of people whom they can kill, you know, because everybody, every priest, every nun, every writer or whatever becomes subversive as soon as he criticizes the fascist government. And it is a fascist government. I think we are aware of this. Washington is aware of it, right? But the reason why the policymakers in Washington hang on to this is that we trust, you know, that the right will balance the whole thing better than the left will. So they are just not our friends, the left.
Traditionally, the Roman Catholic Church has not been very impressed with the left as far as saying that they represent the wave of the future, they represent the Christian ethics. Is this in any sense, these events, is that in any way altering the position of the Roman Catholic Church on that left-right attitude?
Well, I think it's making bishops around the world more willing to denounce what happened and to press Christianity for the bringing to justice of these murderers, of these assassins, of the priests, and so on. I don't think, for instance, Archbishop Rivera recently tried to get the hostilities to cease and to be a mediator between the government and the FMLN, you know, hoping that some kind of a negotiation could work out. Well, there was less cooperation from the FMLN with that than there was from the government. And he said publicly that he questioned the sincerity of their intentions. So I think the concern for the poor that the sisters and all have is very legitimate. That's where the church belongs, on the side of the poor. Neither political faction seems to have their hands totally clean of violence and bloodshed at all. I think that Christianity, from what the Jesuits have said, seem to offer some hope. I don't really know. I have to be honest about that. I don't know nearly as much as Rudy does, but I don't know if I'm completely comfortable with calling him a fascist, at least, say, in the sense that Somoza was a fascist. I think that Christianity he certainly is a member of the right-wing party, but he seems to be trying to do something in an honorable and just way. And some of these Jesuits who were killed seem to give him a certain amount of credit, but I'm really not the authority on that.
They were killed, yeah. Now, it seems that, I almost said Dobbyson, because he also belongs to the Wiener Party and is responsible for the killing of Romero.
Yes.
So
do you think that Christianity and Dobbyson are the same?
No, they belong to the same party. But what I wanted to say is that Christianity is not very powerful. You see, he's some kind of a figurehead, and his Air Force general, for instance, you know, seems to have much more power, and also the Minister of Defense, Vice Minister of Defense or so, these two seem to have much more power, you know, in, for instance, ordering the death squads or bombardments. You know, they strafed the town and bombarded the town. So that this does not come so much from Christianity, but from his ministers.
There does seem to be another faction there. There seems to be the FMLN, Christianity, and then this other faction, which may indeed hold Christianity anyway at their mercy. And such that if he even punishes these murderers, he may be toppled himself. He may be the next one killed.
So you practically have a very weak government, and then you have two armies. You know, that's what.
That's really what.
Are you aware, Rudy, of any Protestant church activity in El Salvador, and how do they line up? Are they supportive of the government, or are they supportive of the
I think
left?
it is very ecumenical, and I think that the Protestant groups, like the Catholic groups, you know, have this preferential option for the poor.
So most of the religious people, then, of El Salvador would be lined up against the government, in your opinion? And
well, it is not so much against the government than for the poor. And when they are for the poor, and there is a government whose main concern, you know, is the removal of the obstruction of the market, that means to get cheap labor, then, of course, they are also against the government, but they don't want to be against the government. They want to be for the poor.
How does this fit in with the other countries in Central America where there's been tension, Nicaragua, Honduras, Panama? Is there any relationship here between the stress in that area? in these other countries?
Yes, I mean, our interest is the same. You see, 50% of our profit comes from the third world. And so we could not exist without this profit from the third world. It is not so much the individual country. One can say El Salvador is now so poor and so slow. Why do we, don't we pull back and so on? But, it's a domino theory, which is, after all, unconsciously there anyway. If they negotiate now, the alternative is now negotiation or war. It's the same thing when I was in Palestine, the same thing. The Jewish generals, war, not negotiation and so on. It's the same thing. But if there will be negotiations, it will be a socialistic state. It will be even a Christian socialistic state, because there are Christians among the Liberation Front, you see. Something like that. We have the whole priest cabinet in Nicaragua, and then we have the junta, you see, which is socialistic. It is a combination of Christianity and socialism. So that's what we will have. Now, we will still get some profit, but under socialist law, we cannot take 4 times, our investments out, like in Chile. So that is the problem which we have in all these countries. We don't want to murder anybody, but we are afraid that the obstruction of the market will become so intense that we lose those territories for cheap resources and cheap labor.
You've called the right fascist there.
Yeah.
Is the left communist?
Well, the left consists of many different socialistic groups which are all bound together in one. It has a political arm, it has a military arm and so on, but it is socialistic led under all, yes, certainly. And then, of course, the whole fascist constellation or so, the combination of the military-industrial complex, as Eisenhower called that, the low middle classes, which are threatened from below and above and so on, and the fundamentalist religion belongs to the fascist constellation and so on. So in that, and the charismatic leader and so on, this is the fascist constellation, and there is something of this, going on in this. I saw it even in East Germany, where there is a danger with the relaxation of socialism that these nationalistic and fascist tendencies come up again. It is when capitalism comes into a crisis, that fascism is called in. They are paid, in order to protect and remove the obstruction of the market. And I think the church, has to make up its mind. The church, we had a concordat with Hitler, we had a concordat, we had a
the Roman Catholic Church,
treaty with Mussolini, you see. We had a concordat with Spain and Portugal and so on. It was John the 23rd, you see, who was one of the cooperators with these concordats, who then made a turn and thought maybe the church's place, is not so much on the right any longer. Maybe the gospel and the Sermon on the Mount, where I just went to, where the Sermon on the Mount was preached at the Sea of Galilee, directs us more to the other side than to the fascist side.
Father Bob, it's pretty clear where Rudy's sympathies are. What about Roman Catholics in the United States? Is there a lining up now against the right wing? I
would basically say that there are 2 factors that impact. The National Catholic Reporter is a rather well-known newspaper of a very far left persuasion, and they, of
That's what I read all the time.
Are trying.
Not surprised.
They are trying to line up people, to share Rudy's particular perspective. The only other source of information is the National Conference of Bishops, which feeds us very helpful information coming from Archbishop Rivera-Damas himself and his own perspectives and the various dialogue that people have. And that does seem to be a much more, to my way of thinking, moderate and, peaceable approach. And yet, Archbishop Rivera has in no way tried to condone the excesses either of the right or of the left in no way, shape, or form. And as a matter of fact, he and his auxiliary bishop have both had their lives repeatedly threatened by both sides, really. And it's these matters that the bishops in the United States are very concerned about. They're concerned about the poor, and they're concerned about the freedom of religious leaders to speak out. They're not so much interested in taking a side between Christiani and the FMLN. And like Rivera, they would, and unlike, I guess, Rudy, they would be much more eager to condemn both sides than to say, well, there are wrongs in both, but I sympathize over here.
What about the Pope? Has he spoken on this issue at all? Has he addressed it in any way?
Only to pray for peace and justice with no violence. And that is about all that he is in a position ever to say publicly about these matters, because he has to leave things to those diplomats and archbishops and so on who are on the local scene. It's why, for example, the Pope was not eager to say anything at all when Noriega was holed up in the embassy in Panama.
But finally he said something, didn't he?
It's just not, you know, not his...
Yeah. I would say this is the classical Catholic position in the social encyclical letters, you know, between liberal, even the last one, Sollicitudo Rei Socialis, between the two fronts, you know, and it is a rather precarious point of view, but the Church tries to keep this, you know. Now, can you do this in this type of class struggle which is going on in El Salvador and other places, you know? Can one somehow move above the fronts or so? I appreciate this position, you know, but at the same time we have experiences where the Church has moved, you know, let's say under Hitler and so on, too far to the right. But I never always do it, because I lived in a parish where my priest, you know, was beaten by the Gestapo and so on. You had resistance people, but the hierarchy as such, except two exceptions in Germany, rather was willing, you know, to be between and maybe to cooperate. See, when you are neutral, there's always the danger that you are on the right, nevertheless, you know. That is maybe the dangerous thing of this classical position. And we simply have to have discourse about this, you know, what the wisest thing is.
I don't think I don't know think that neutrality is quite the word. In other words, there's a clear position here, but it's a neutrality insofar as it doesn't take sides. It's not a neutrality which is a kind of aloof indifference.
Yeah, that wouldn't work, yeah.
So, you know, we don't want to be aloof and we don't want to be indifferent. But when we just cannot feel comfortable on either side, I think we have to say that.
Yeah, I mean, when you say the preferential option for the poor, then you say very clearly we're on the side of the poor. But then you can say the Liberation Front, you know, will not do anything for the poor, or will not do enough for the poor, or they will not do what we think they should do for the poor. And so I think that is the problem. But I think the thing, preferential option for the poor, is decisive in terms of the Latin American bishop. Now, there they have sided. This is not neutrality any longer. You see, that is
what is the difference now between the goals of the left wing in Latin America and the situation in Russia and in Eastern Europe, when socialism in its Marxist guise has made its people poor and its upper class elite people who are in the hierarchy have lived a life of luxury? What guarantee do you have that the left wing in South America will be quite different from the left wing in Russia and in Bucharest, or in Bulgaria and Romania, Albania, and Eastern Germany? We've seen the absolute failure of the left as a way of life that gives prosperity and freedom to people. And so I'm just a little disturbed about your espousal of the left without any kind of saying, hey, but on the other hand, we've learned a lesson in Central Europe and in Russia. The people are poor under the left-wing philosophy of life. Do you have an answer to that?
Well, I was just there, you know, and looked at the poverty and so on. Well, one has to be very careful, because one has to very differentiated type of a view. And also, if we would think, you know, that Eastern Europe now leaves socialism or whatever, the phony socialism they had, we would be very disappointed soon. There would be a backlash. It is a reconstruction of socialism. But let me go back to this, the revolutionaries there and so on. Capitalism can be defined as the private appropriation of collective surplus labor. That means the work or the value which the workers produce beyond their costs. So if they cost only, like Upjohn and Kellogg, pay only 35 cents an hour or so, then you have a tremendous amount of surplus labor and so on, surplus value. Now what the socialists will do if they win, they will introduce some kind of collective appropriation of collective surplus labor. That means that those who produce the surplus labor and value will appropriate it. That is the same thing in Yugoslavia, in Poland, and so on, and that is what they will do. And now, because those who work should get what they work. See, what we have here is very often that people who don't produce the surplus labor get it, and those who produce don't get it. So this is what they are up to.
That's their goal.
Yeah,
but now, can you help me to understand, why is it that after 40 years, the socialist countries have not produced the surplus? There have been no surpluses to share except at the very top. So these people live in opulence. They have all the luxuries, a very small percentage. In capitalism, a much larger percentage of people live with a measure of affluence.
I mean, we do have 33 million people in the slums, and we have 10 million people starving, and we have 38 million without Medicare. So if you say socialism has failed, then capitalism has failed too. Or so. But I went into a town in East Germany, a little roll, 1 cent, a loaf of bread, 10 cents, and so on. Yeah. The prices are so that there are no hungry people. Everybody has something to eat. But let me say a jokey thing. There is a little car which is called Trabant.
Yes,
it comes now over to West Germany. It's tiny, it's blue, it's yellow, whatever. Now I drove a Mercedes, 300 miles on the highway. And these little things, you cannot see them anymore, you see. But you see, is this now the measure for a good society, that one has a Mercedes, for a few at least, and the others travel around in these tiny little things which cannot make it over 80 miles or so. It depends, on the criterion which you have in order to judge comparatively to two systems. And I do not glorify, anything. I mean, there was the Lenin Revolution, to which Gorbachev is a devoted Leninist, and then there was the Stalinist, reaction to it. Then there was the Khrushchev, and then was Brezhnev, counter-revolution again. Now we have a revolutionary push and so on. So one has to see the up and down and the struggle back and forth. Now Honecker, you know what this luxury means, what they have, these leaders, for which they may be put on trial now. He had a little hunting lodge, you know that nobody can have stocks or bonds or whatever, but you can have consumer goods. So he put a little hunting lodge at a lake. That is what they charge him for now, you see, because he had that luxury, while the other people had to eat little sausages or little trappies.
Now that's possible with Honecker, but on the other hand, most of these people who have been in positions of power in left-wing governments also have uniquely large bank accounts in Switzerland. Yeah. It's become pretty evident.
You could say, they would say that the bourgeois character breaks through even after the revolution.
I would think, though, in fairness, though, we have to admit
this all the time. I mean, we are not don't have the moral basis, to judge them, because it's rather usual affair here.
I would just like to say one little thing about Italy, if I may, this
sure.
connection. I think it's notable that the farther they have drifted away from socialism, the closer that they have moved toward full employment. They have practically full employment right now in Italy, and they have an unbelievably strong economy. And I'm not in a position to judge. They may have really the strongest economy in Europe. It amuses me that day by day we hear how well the dollar is doing by and large. The dollar has been failing, stable or failing, for almost 2 years now against the Italian lira. And people are prospering unbelievably there, and there is a job certainly for everyone who wants one. That I have on very good authority. But it does seem that as socialism has failed there, and there has been more private enterprise, that this has been better for the collectivity.
But in Italy we have most of the mayors are communists,
Is that right?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Well, there are. I mean, the Italian Communist
foreign relations
Party is real. But again, though, it's a very different type of communism than it's a very accommodated form
in the
of
2 minutes
communism.
remaining, I would like to what's your prognosis for the future? Are these people going to continue to suffer? Is there going to be that ongoing battle? And
well, in El Salvador, you mean? El Salvador?
Yes,
well,
yes.
I think that we will try, our policymakers will try, and the middle class and upper bourgeoisie says, kill them or negotiate. Well, I think probably will try a little bit to kill, but the upper class in El Salvador are already somewhat pragmatic and say, well, if you cannot kill them, negotiate. And I hope that's what they will do.
What can we do? Anything we can do as Americans?
Yes, I mean, there are different groups in this country which want to support, with money. I mean, there are people who fly the wounded out. There are people who want to have islands for non-combatants and so on. So I think there are a lot of people here who help. Yes.
Is the Catholic Church providing sanctuary for people who flee from El Salvador?
In what sense?
We do.
Well, in the sense that if people get out and are here as illegal aliens, will the Catholic Church provide help for them, shelter for them?
Well, yes and no. I mean, we won't break.
You won't break
the civil law in order to do it.
But I guess in fact, it's happening.
It is happening. Yeah. Let me put it to you this way, and this is kind of really the official policy, that no bishop can go on record as saying, now, it's my policy to violate the civil law of the United States. But I do not know a priest in a rectory or sisters in a convent who, if somebody presented himself or herself and were down and out, would not make some provision.
Okay.
And I don't know any bishops who would denounce their having made the provision in the concrete specific.
Well, it's been good to have both of you here. It's a tremendous problem. There's a lot of sorrow and heartbreak there, and I guess we should remember to pray for the people of El Salvador. But it's been very illuminating to hear the discussion, particularly from your point of view. It's something that many Americans don't hear. Friends, we hope to join us again next week for another program of Markings. We're happy that you were with us for this week.